Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Look at these two wonderful, incredible guests. I have an absolute honor to be joined by two truly the best experts in military and actually geopolitics as well, and history on the top of it, with Mr. Andrei Martyanov and Mr. Scott Ritter. Thank you both so much for making this roundtable to happen. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
A lot is going on, but before we start with this, I just want to say hello to everyone who's watching us. If you will appreciate this live stream after it's finished, please share it with other people, hit that like, it helps the channel. And if you would like to support my guests, all the links to Andrei and to Scott you already have down below under the live stream attached there. So just follow them, read their books, and make sure you listen to the right people, because that's crucial nowadays. So a lot is going on, and I would like to start not with Ukraine, but with the Holy Land, Israel and Palestine. And as I was getting ready for this conversation today, I just look at the description. Why the Holy Land? Why? So Holy Land for the Christians is the birthplace of Jesus of Nazareth and the site of his ministry. For the Muslims, Jerusalem's dome of the rock that marks the spot from which the Prophet Muhammad is said to have ascended to heaven. I have three main things that I would like to address today in this conversation, and that is the land, the plan, and the timing. I really don't know much. Let's be honest, I don't know almost anything about this conflict that has been going on for generations, centuries, forever. It seems forever. However, if someone comes to you and doesn't know anything, like I don't, and will ask you, who has really created Hamas?
That's Scott's field. He's the best in that. So
I don't know about I don't know about the best on it, but look, just to answer this question, I think it's important that people know where I'm coming from on this. I was a student of Russian history in college, but I was also a student of Middle Eastern history. I had a very, very fine professor, Professor Joseph, an Assyrian, Iraqi-born Assyrian Christian, who I took many, many courses from him. And then, the Middle East was my bailiwick for some time now. I may have cut my arms control teeth in the Soviet Union, but I came to maturity as a real man, I guess, in the Middle East, through war and through peace, through disarmament efforts, etc. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I almost lived there full time for about a decade. And much of that time was spent in Israel, working with Israelis, working with the Israeli Defense Force, working with the Israeli intelligence. And I was blessed while I was there to not only have access to the highest levels in Israel, but I was hosted by this fantastic Israeli intelligence officer who was extraordinarily open-minded. And, when I first went to Israel, they give you the standard, propaganda package tour, because the Israelis are some of the best in the world at selling Israel to the Goyim, to people like me, non-Jews. And so, they put you in the helicopter, which is always impressive, and then they fly you to Masada, and they show you Masada. They explain history. The whole idea is to create the idea of fortress Europe, fortress Israel, this Jewish enclave packed from all sides. They flew me to the Golan Heights. Well, actually, we didn't fly. We had to land and then drive up the Golan Heights, because it's much more dramatic to drive up the slopes of the Golan Heights while they explain how the Syrians were firing down and the Jewish soldiers had to fight their way up, and they're never going to fight their way up again. Once they've got it, they're never giving it back. And you're nodding your head going, oh, yeah, I got that. and then they take you to the Negev. I have toured many of the kibbutzes that have currently been at the front lines of this. There's a interesting museum and one that talks about the struggle of the kibbutzniks against the Gazans and that whole thing. But my guy was more than a propagandist. He was somebody, I mean, his whole approach was, Scott, kick a stone. And I'd kick a stone. He said, you've just uncovered centuries of history just by kicking that stone. Everything that has happened here is historic. I've walked the Via Dolorosa. I've walked the Stations of Christ in Jerusalem. I have gone to the Sea of Galilee and been to where Jesus performed. I went to the place where the miracle on the we turned water into wine and the fishes. I've been to the Jordan River where the baptism took place. And I'm not a devout Christian, but I have to tell you that travel did something. It hits you because you're like, wow, this is history. I've been to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock. I've been inside. I've been given a tour by the Mufti. I've been to the Wailing Wall, so I have touched the stone of all of the religions that are there. I'm not an expert in it, but I've been there. And I worked with Israeli intelligence. While I was in Israel, every single time I arrived, Hamas committed an act of terrorism. Sometimes the act of terrorism were just 100 yards away from where I was. Sometimes it was where I had eaten dinner the night before, or I'd gone shopping for my wife the day before. And it was personal. The Israelis I worked with would be crying, their eyes out because of the death. But I'd always say, hey, guys want to take a break? And they'd say, no, we have to keep working. We have to keep working. And what were they working for? Because when I first went there, the prime minister at the time was Yitzhak Rabin. He's the man who did the 1993 Oslo Accords. He's the man who did Oslo II in September of 1995. He was a man of peace. And the people I worked with believed in him and believed in that mission. The guys I talked to, the vast majority of them were Sabras. They had been born there. They were Israelis through and true. Their parents had been the Zionists who came over in the 20s who built the kibbutz. But they understood that they had to learn to live in peace with the Palestinians if there was ever going to be peace there. And that's what Yitzhak Rabin stood for, and that's what the officer who hosted me stood for. There was a guy named the engineer, Ayash, his name was, a Hamas operative who built the bombs, all the bombs that went off. And the Israelis finally got him in an operation, a cell phone with 15 grams of high explosive. He answered the phone. They confirmed it was him. Pop, boom, dead. And I would talk. I said, that's I guess that's a good thing they got. And they said, yeah, but you do understand, Scott, that we made him. We made him. We're responsible for Hamas. Hamas, yes, is something that's sprung up from the tragedy of the Palestinian people. When I was in the Negev at the kibbutzes, we were talking about how this happened. In 1946, there was only 500 Jews in the Negev desert. 500. In October of 1946, they carried out what's called the 11 Points Operation, where teams of Israeli soldiers would seize a hilltop, take control of it, and then they brought in prefabricated buildings to create this kibbutz. And they'd be right next to these Arab villages. In many of these places, overnight, this Israeli settlement shows up and they bring in people and they're just quadrupling, tripling, order of magnitude, increasing the Jewish population in the Negev. But they were next to these Arab villages. And the Arab villages on this one hillside, the Israelis that took it over didn't have any water. So they're there on top of the hill. They got no water. The Arabs brought water to them and said, here's water. Welcome our neighbors. Some of us aren't happy about this, but we recognize the inevitability of this. We welcome you. And then as 1946 turned into 1948, it became inevitable that Israel was going to take the Negev. And so these Arabs all went to their Israeli neighbors and said, hey, we're living in peace. So when this happens, please let us stay here in our homes. And the Israelis are all like, yep. Boom. The war came and they wiped them all out. They went into the villages of the villagers who gave them water and they killed the men into a ravine and shot them. They went house by house by house, shooting the men in there. If this sounds a lot like what happened on Saturday, it is exactly what happened on Saturday. But this time it's Israelis kicking down the door, shooting the men, evicting hundreds of thousands of these people, what they call the Nakba, the catastrophe. They put the women and children and the surviving men on trucks and shipped them to Gaza. And then around Gaza, they built a series of kibbutzes to hold them in, keep them prisoner there. So they created this open air concentration camp. And the kibbutzes are there to keep the Arabs in. That's it. That's what happened. Now, they had a problem here. And, one of the, if you study Israeli history, and I have, like I said, I lived there. I worked with them, and my host was historically minded. There's a speech. In America, we have the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln's great address given in Gettysburg after the battle, and it's seen as one of the great statements of who we are as a people. We, the government of the people, by the people, for the people, great speech. Well, the Israelis have a similar speech, but it's the eulogy read by Moshe Dayan in 1956 for a guy named Roy Rutenberg. Roy Rutenberg was a soldier of the kibbutz. He was in one of the kibbutzes now that's at the front line of this, where some horrible things happened on Saturday and Sunday. But he was ambushed by Arabs from Gaza and killed. And there's a lot of anger. And so Moshe Dayan came and gave a speech. And in the speech, he says, don't blame the Gazans. He says, because we live here on the land we stole from their families. We live on this land and they stare at us with eyes of hatred and we ignore them. We pretend they don't exist. We treat them as animals. So don't blame them for coming at us, because this is what we did. Then he goes on to say, but what we did, we had to do. We had to do. And we must keep the sword in our hand to keep these people away. That's the reality. Israel created the problem of Gaza, created the problem of the Palestinian of the West Bank. Then what happens in the 1980s, when Yasser Arafat's Fatah movement, PLO, become very powerful and influential, the Israelis say, how do we break them up? Within Gaza, because it's very close to Egypt, and Egypt had a movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, a very radical, violent-oriented group, and the Egyptians suppressed them, killed a lot of guys, arrested a lot of guys. The number two man, Zawahiri in Al-Qaeda, was a Muslim Brotherhood dude from Egypt. But many of the Muslim Brotherhood gravitated to Gaza, where they were hiding out from the Egyptians. What the Israelis did is said, hey, why don't we empower the Muslim Brotherhood? Why don't we help turn them into a movement that can offset Yasser Arafat's PLO? So in the 1980s, Israel made Hamas. Israel made Hamas. Now, you already had the elements there, but Israel breathed life into them. Israel created Hamas. In 2006, Israel helped Hamas move from being a terrorist organization. And just think what I'm saying. Israel made the organization that was blowing up buses when I was in Israel. Israel made the organization that blew up a restaurant that I used to eat at when I was in Israel. Israel made this organization, and now they're at war with this organization. And then in 2006, they do something even more unbelievable. They helped turn Hamas into a political movement, not just a terrorist movement, but to mainstream them, to legitimize them, to make them a movement capable of governing Gaza, because the purpose was to strip Gaza away from the West Bank, from Fatah, from the PLO. And they succeeded. And now we ask what happened this most recent go-around. Israel's been struggling to deal with Hamas ever since. And the current feeling is that they have succeeded in creating the conditions where Hamas will stop being a terrorist organization whose charter, by the way, used to read the destruction of Israel was their mission. They've modified it with words that some people say, see, they're not calling for the destruction of Israel. They really are. They just changed the word. That happened in 2006, so the settlements could be withdrawn. In 2005, become a purely Palestinian land, but it's a concentration camp run by the Israelis. Everything's run by the Israelis. But they make Hamas. Now, what they said this time around was, because everybody's calling this an intelligence failure. This is the biggest intelligence failure ever. Well, it is, but it's also a byproduct of something that's been biting the Israelis in the butt for decades, called the conception. See, Israelis tend to believe they know best about everything dealing with Israel. I'm here to tell you right now, one of the reasons why it's so screwed up is they don't, because they're corrupted by their arrogance, their hubris, They're blinded to reality because they bought into the Zionist fantasy of this is God's mission to give this to us. Therefore, we ignore everything else. But they came in and they said, we know we're getting signals from Hamas, from intelligence, that there's something going on. But we believe that the Hamas leadership has made the transition from terrorist group to a governing body. And we facilitated that by, and here's again the arrogance of this. We opened the doors recently and allowed 1,000 Gazans to go into Israel and get menial jobs, to do the scut work that nobody else wants to do, minimum wage jobs. Now, we search them, strip search on the way in, and we strip search, so we dehumanize them both ways, but we give them a couple shekels. And then they come in and they say, oh, look, we have shekels. We're able to buy a little bit of stuff. And the Israelis went, see, we've made life better for them. They would never do anything to undo that. But they did, because Hamas has been playing Israel. Hamas, we go back to Moshe Dayan's words, Hamas has been sitting in Gaza staring at the Israelis on the other side of the line with burning fire in their eyes. They hate these people who stole their land because it was their land. They hate these people who murdered their grandparents because those grandparents were the original settlers on that. Hamas will never forgive Israel, never forgive the Israelis, and the cycle of hatred will continue. But to answer your question, who created Hamas? Israel created Hamas. If you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. And that's what is happening to Israel right now.
Can I say something? Andrei, you say, I look at this as a spiritual in the world. This is good versus evil. So from this incredible knowledge that you share with us, Scott, I actually understand that evil has created evil. Because
hatred always creates
now,
evil.
At this point, people in the world, in my opinion, I might be wrong, they associate a Palestinian mother, child, whoever from Palestine, they associate them with Hamas. I might be wrong, but this is the image that has been presented. So if anyone says they don't want the suffering on both sides, they don't want the Israelis to suffer or the Palestinians to suffer, people associate, no, this is evil because Palestine equals Hamas. And it's not true. Is it? It's not.
No, Hamas is Hamas. Hamas is a very radical organization that uses fear and intimidation to get to get to where they're at. But remember this: under normal circumstances, I believe the vast majority of Palestinians would walk away from Hamas. If there was a free Palestine, they would not tolerate Hamas, because the thing I've learned, again, I don't want to pretend that I'm the world's greatest thing on anything. I'm not. I'm a simple guy, but I've traveled the world. I've met with people from all faiths, ethnicities, backgrounds, and I've spent a lot of time with Muslims, And I'm here to tell you right now that of the three religions that are out there, the great religions from the Holy Land, Islam is the most peaceful religion there is. It's been perverted by some. ISIS, yes. Hamas, yes. But it is a religion of peace. I've never met more peaceful people than the mullahs that I spoke to. They do not seek violence. The Muslims that I meet with, they want to live in peace. They genuinely care about you. I travel in Christian lands and I meet people who call themselves Christians, and I've never seen so much hate in the hearts of Christians. They hate people. They tolerate death and destruction. And all we have to do is take a look at the Holy Land where the Jewish nation is and see the words coming out from these devout Jews, and you see the hatred in these words. I'm not saying that Muslims are incapable of hatred. Of course they are. What I'm saying is that the majority of the Muslims that I've met are peace-loving people whose religion leads them up down the path of peace. So if the Palestinians were given an opportunity to have their own homeland, where they owned the soil, where they got to make daily decisions of life that we all enjoy. Imagine, Andre, if you wanted to go on a flight right now and go to an airport, you go to an airport, it's your airport. It's it's your country. Imagine now to try and fly out of Gaza. You can't, because you're not allowed to have an airport. You're not allowed to fly. Israel won't let you. You want to take a cruise ship? Can't. Shut down the port. Can't. And you're not allowed to go to Egypt because that's a foreign country. You're in a prison. You're in a concentration camp. So imagine suddenly telling the Palestinian people, no, you can build an airport so that your people can fly around the world free of the hassle that Israel's imposed on you. Imagine having your own government that made decisions for you. Imagine being in control of your electricity and your water and everything, instead of being in a place where the Israelis control everything, because the Israelis they hold you hostage. Israel is holding 2 million Palestinians hostage in a concentration camp. And that's where the hatred comes from. So if you grow up knowing nothing but living under these conditions, maybe you're not going to be the person that says Islam is a religion of peace, and etc. Maybe now you'll start to listen to the guy who says it must be jihad, we must turn to the sword, and he'll quote whatever portions of the Quran could be extracted and perverted and misinterpreted, and say, that Allah, God, wants you to go forth and kill, and that you're allowed to do so, etc., etc. Christians do it, Jews do it, Muslims do it. But I'm here to tell you right now that the average Palestinian would not buy into that nonsense if they had their own homeland. And the only reason why Palestinians in Gaza tolerate Hamas is that they've been given no other choice. Hamas is the only path out of this concentration camp hell that's been put forward by anybody.
Andrei said in his latest video, I recommend everyone who's watching to go on Andrei's channel and listen to his latest video. He said many important things, but one thing I would like to ask Andrei now, this is my feeling too, again, not being an expert like both of you gentlemen, but we will get into Ukraine story, as the support to Ukraine is not as eager as it used to be. There's less money, less weapons. It's fading away, and the magic of Zelensky is poof, gone, right, with the wind. This is quite, please don't take it in the wrong way, the word I use, quite convenient to shift the attention now to that region, okay? Because we have the election coming, etc. Andrei, I want to ask you about the timing of it. What is the timing of it? Why it's so significant? Why now? Why now?
As Mr. Churchill used to say, never let the good crisis go to waste. It's a perfect switcheroo for the United States to basically switch the focus of public opinion and basically generate, which is obviously it's a horrible tragedy and in Gaza there. And I am on record, Israel Defense Force does what it does best, bomb innocent and non-defenseless people with impunity from the air. That's their modus operandi, basically. So, but the point is that whatever the hypothesis we advance here, there is no better timing than what have happened a few days ago, because suddenly, did you see any news about Ukraine in media lately? None whatsoever, except for Pentagon officials saying that, well, I mean, some say Mr. Austin, who doesn't know how to run anything, he says that, oh, we have enough ammunition to supply Ukraine and, Israel. But of course, reality is that basically public opinion shifts away from what is happening in Ukraine as we speak right now. Russians are surrounding Avdiivka, which is the concentration of the best troops, whatever is left from the armed forces of Ukraine. It is also this kind of, the wound which was hurting for the last 18 months, because this is where they shoot primarily at innocent people of Donetsk. which is a somewhat similar situation, of course, not as intense. And so Russians advanced dramatically in the last 2 days. They took out what is called Tericon. Tericon is basically the mound which is created artificial when you mine the coal. What is the ore or whatever the byproduct of it, the ground, the dirt, whatever, and you create those huge mounds, and they can reach sometimes their very big height. I mean, large, very high, could be sometimes up to 100 meters or something like that. So Russians control them now around Avdiivka, and it looks like their main road. It's now in the basically under fire control, and that means the operational cauldron already is formed. The Russians probably going to close it at some point of time, fairly soon. And what do you have? You have another Mariupol. You have actually, it's going to be much larger than Mariupol, because you have tens of thousands of the best what's left from the Ukrainian, some NATO troops there. And guess what? You can imagine now what it's going to be. It's going to be literally tearing the whole front line of armed forces of Ukraine and then pouring into the east. And then we'll see whatever it happens. It's a catastrophe for Washington, not only for Kiev. Kiev lost the war already long ago. But for United States and for its pundits and the propagandists of the war, it is a catastrophe. It is a catastrophe because the whole project of Ukraine, it was collapsing already. It's just basically their kind of end in a sense of any kind of sensible defense. And plus, Russians advanced at Kupiansk operational axis, so it just, where's those, again, when you look at Jake Sullivan or Anthony Blinken, they are lawyers. They never served a day in their uniform. The same goes for the most of the corporate American journals. They only operate there for their, basically promoting their dear self. They do not understand that the real war, the territory, especially in the 21st century, is not an indication of anything, really. You go in, you go out. But now what is happening? Russians begin to gain more and more territory. And once the Kupiansk is broken through, and let alone Avdiivka is surrounded, my gosh, we're looking at the catastrophe of the whole special military operation for Ukraine. So there you go. Then suddenly it's like perfect timing. We have this situation with Hamas conducting, and I'm not gonna mince words. Much of it was terrorist acts. Once you take civilian hostages, and that's terrorism, pure and simple. But Scott made a great introduction to the subject matter, because actually it's between Israel and them, and now, of course, we have this whole international community going bananas. The only player who doesn't go bananas are Russians, and Putin 2 days ago was pretty clear. You want to stop this? Give Palestinians their own state. You know what? I'm not a specialist in the area in sense of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I totally totally understand what Scott is describing. Plus, I have my own type, research, so to speak, including, of course, Mearsheimer's and Walt's famous book, The Israel Lobby, and, of course, Alfred Lilienthal's great book from 1972, The Zionist Connection. I have them. So I kind of understand what Scott is talking about. So you know what? The only way probably to resolve it once and for all is to cut on the Israel's appetites and find the place for Palestinians to have their own state. And United States screwed it up, but at least for now, in PR sense, they can remove the attention of public opinion from the catastrophe in Ukraine, because we have actually, I call it, and it's, make no mistake, it's sarcastic, but it's not kind of, making fun or joke about it. But we do live now in the last 3 days in the atrocities porn situation. It is literally atrocities porn, because there are atrocities. And Israel is conducting right now war crimes, wholesale, against Palestinians. So this is, I mean, this goes without saying. Again, the best that Israel does is bomb somebody with impunity. That's their modus operandi. That's how they trained. So there you go.
Can I say two things on this? I mean, Andre, first of all, I'd like your opinion on the following, because I'm taking a look what's happening at Vika, and I'm just being hit by deja vu all over again. When you look at Bakhmut and the way the Russians developed the battle for Bakhmut, they threatened the Ukrainians with a cauldron, same tactic, pin them in the south, hook them in the north, and then the Ukrainians are given the option to withdraw or reinforce, and they just poured more and more troops in. Zelensky appears this time to have made the decision to reinforce. He sent the 31st Brigade, one of his elite brigades, in, and he's going to put in more because Advika is huge psychologically. It's the centerpiece of their defensive lines. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, Putin met with the son of, he did meet with the son of Prigozhin, but he also met with, I think, Troishin. I might be getting that name wrong, but, and it appears that, Wagner has sort of self-fractured, so to speak, meaning that many of the Wagner guys went and signed a contract with they have their own thing that they're doing in Africa that I think's fallen under the wings of the Ministry of Defense. Others have signed something with the Ministry of Defense in the theater, and they're looking at capturing the rest of them in sort of a Wagner type unit under the Rosguardia, under the Russian National Guard. But the bottom line is Wagner's coming back, and they may already be back in the special military operation as an independent unit that preserves the character that they had in Bakhmut. And the reason why I bring that up is Putin said at the time that we think there's a use for this skill set in Advika. He said so. So I think the Russians are getting ready to carry out some extraordinarily vicious urban warfare in one of the most heavily fortified spots. And it's another trap, I believe. I don't know if the Russians are going to be closing the cauldron. I think the Russians are going to repeat the formula that they've had in the past to get the Ukrainians. They'll set up the conditions for a meat grinder and get the Ukrainians just to continue to feed in fresh meat. And it's already working. Look at in Robotyno, the Ukrainian counteroffensive has stopped. They've stopped. They've got nothing left. Up in Kupiansk, they've got nothing left. And now they're going to put it all into Advika. And when that battle's over, it's going to be total collapse. But I bring that up just to make another point about Gaza, because the reason why I think why Putin was trying to get Wagner in is they are specialists in urban conflict. You know who's not a specialist in urban conflict? The Israeli specialists. And they got 300,000 scared boys right now who haven't trained for this. They don't know. The last time they went into Gaza in 2014, they got the snot kicked out of them by Hamas. Hamas has learned every lesson, is prepared. It is a death trap right now, Gaza. That's why I don't think they're going to go in. Yes, Anya.
Who trains Hamas?
Who trained Hamas? Hamas trained Hamas. Why don't we respect Hamas? These are smart guys who've been fighting the Israelis for a long time, and they've learned a lot of good lessons. They educate themselves. Let's just give them the credit where they don't have to be trained by anybody. They're the best.
Okay.
Best trainers.
Who delivers the weapons to Hamas?
Iran does. There's no secret about it. We've intercepted. Israel's intercepted. We just delivered. Come on, let's be clear here. We just delivered to Ukraine 1.1 million rounds of ammunition. That ain't much, by the way. If you take a look at how many rounds are fired in combat, somebody did a study that basically you fire over 2,200 rounds of ammunition before you get a single casualty. So we've given the Ukrainians 1.1 million rounds. They're North Korean ammunition, by the way. There's the bitter irony of this. We've given Ukraine North Korean ammunition, but it was seized on a ship that I believe was being delivered to the Houthi. But the Israelis have been diverting Iranian and North Korean Iranian ammunition to Ukraine that they seized on a ship that was intended for Hamas in Gaza. We've been seizing weapons from Iran for decades now. And a lot of that's fallen into the hands of the Ukrainians. So I know there's big videos out there about American weapons being diverted to Hamas. But no one's talking about the fact that a lot of the most recent shipments that have been made to Ukraine are actually shipments of seized North Korean weapons being shipped via Iran to Hamas. But no, Iran's been supplying Hamas for some time. And on critical things, again, just since you asked the question, Hamas has extraordinarily sophisticated signals intelligence capability. We talk about Unit 8200, which is Israel's national security agency. But Hamas and Hezbollah. In 2006, Hezbollah broke into the encrypted frequency hopping radios used by Israel. They broke in and they had linguists who had been studying the Israelis on the other end. So not only are they breaking in and decrypting it, doing it real time. So they're getting into the frequency hopping system, and then they're decrypting it real time. And then they have linguists who speak with the accents and the lexicon of the Israeli operators. So they came in, they ambushed Sayat Matkal, the elite Israeli commando force, was getting ready to move in on the village. Hamas broke into their comms, and the platoon commander is waiting for a code, a signal. I think it was Apple. And this guy comes in and goes, execute Apple, in perfect Hebrew with the slang and the accent. And Sayat Matkal began their operation. Bam! Taken out by Hezbollah. Why? Because they're that good. Who trained them on this technique? Iran. And this should be a warning to everybody out there who says, we need to take on Iran. No, we don't. They stole, just so remember, the Beast of Kandahar. Andre, you know what I'm talking about, the giant B-2 looking drone that flew out of Kandahar to spy on Iran. We'd fly it over Western Iran to map out sites. The Iranians parked guys outside of Kandahar, and all they did is intercept the signal. And they said, okay, so it takes off under control of the ground controller. At a certain height, they pass it off to the satellite, which then links it to Nevada. And they went, okay, right about now they're going to make the link. And they stole it. They hijacked the signal, took control of it, landed it in the desert, and they got our top secret thing. That's how good these people are. And they've been training Hamas on these techniques. Hamas has been listening. Why do you think Hamas knew where every single senior Israeli officer lived? You know, they went house to house. They sent snatch teams in and snatched some very senior Israelis. So it's tragic what happened because they shot the families, but they had to because you can't leave a wife home to make a phone call that says they just snatched my husband. So they go ahead.
Sorry, because I'm learning so much. Okay, so does it mean Hamas intelligence is better than Israelis intelligence?
It means Hamas this time around won this round. I mean, intelligence war is intelligence war. I've been engaged in intelligence wars with the Iraqis, and there's some days where they kick your ass, excuse my language, because they've gotten some. We went on a number of inspections in Iraq because we were fed intelligence from Kurdish sources that we thought we controlled. But the Iraqis went, we know where you're getting your data, and they fed it in there, and then they watched us react, and they knew exactly what we're doing. But once it became clear that they did that, then we changed the algorithm on them. Bam, suddenly we're hitting sites they don't know where we're coming at, and they go, damn, they got inside our decision-making cycle. It's the intelligence war. You learn, you adapt, you learn, you adapt. The Israelis in 2021 won the intelligence war. They went in there and they slapped Hamas around a little bit. Hamas learned from that, and 2 years later, Hamas dominated the Israelis, dominated them, the intel side. The Israelis may learn from this, and boom. Part of learning is, I mean, the best way to learn, I learned this in the Marine Corps, is to make mistakes. I mean, that's the beauty of being a second lieutenant, because all you do is make mistakes. The moment you wake up in the morning, you made a mistake, and then but you learn from it. And then eventually you get promoted, and now you're a little bit more experienced, you make some more mistakes, and you get to the point where you can anticipate your mistakes. But my point is, Israel made mistakes. Hamas learned from these mistakes, They went forward. Now Hamas is making some mistakes, and it's not really a mistake. You make a mistake in the intelligence business by doing something, because the moment you do it, it's identified, collected on, and now they're beginning to figure out how we counter that. And you can't really anticipate the counter until they do it to you. And so that's the nature of the beast. But Hamas had the better intelligence by far this round.
Okay, one more here. Today, someone said, "Tom, my friend," because there was a meeting between Blinken and Netanyahu. And when Netanyahu called Tony my friend and gave this speech, I want to ask you about this moment actually, right? Because as far as timing, I think not that long time ago, about 3 weeks ago or so, there have been a lot of protests in Israel. Let me just mute you guys here because I hear like the sound. Okay. There were a lot of protests on the streets in Israel. A lot of people were protesting, not agreeing with the government, which meant pretty much that Netanyahu is not so approved in Israel. And now the timing of it is like, okay, so he will remain in this position because he has to take care of this mess. So is there another reason about this timing for his presence in this position and continuing the genocide?
Let me answer it this way, because I hear this all the time. It's a conspiracy theory, and problem with this one is there's like data there that reinforces what you're saying. Netanyahu was in a lot of trouble. He's one of the most corrupt politicians in the history of Israel, maybe the most corrupt, and he was going to go down. But what he did by running for re-election as prime minister and by winning, and he won by playing the fear card, by playing up the threat from Iran, from Hamas, etc. So he got back in, and what he's done now is he's moving to change the basic law of Israel. Israel doesn't have a constitution; they have basic law. And one of the things about the basic law that he's trying to change is who appoints judges and who's in control of the judiciary. You're supposed to have an independent judiciary. What he's doing is trying to take over the judiciary so that they will never find him guilty of corruption. He is literally taking over the courts, so he will never be held accountable for that. And and then he's doing it in a way that it's captured by the Likud party, and then they do it because elections are linked to the court and all that stuff. They're going to basically create the situation where the Likud will never lose power, and they will always have a prime minister, and nobody will ever investigate that now. So this is a war for his survival. The Israeli public went insane. That's why you had hundreds of thousands of people in the street. And here's an important thing. Thousands of reservists, primarily pilots, said, we will never fly under Netanyahu. Never, because of what he's done. And so they've called up these reservists, and we're not getting the story of how many have said, we don't care what happened there, we're not flying. But now people will say, in order to attract these people, something horrible had to happen, something that overwhelmed their hatred of Netanyahu, that united. And you see Benny Gantz, I think, is the opposition leader. They're now created a government of unity. So they've come together. Oh, it's love and harmony right now in Israel. We're not allowed to recognize that Netanyahu is still the corrupt pig that he's always been. He's now the leader of Israel. And now we're finding out from the head of intelligence and the head of the military that they actually had received not just indications from Egypt, which Israel continues to deny. They had received intelligence that said something's happening now. And they've admitted, we were having conversations the night before. Imagine if your family members were slaughtered on Saturday morning in one of these kibbutzes. And now you're hearing from the chief of staff and the head of intelligence that we had indications this attack was happening. And we actually had conversations with ourselves, but we decided to wait until morning. Had they acted that night, had they hit the button and said, everybody wake up, stand to, get your boys out there with the machine guns, pop the flares in the sky, do what you got to do to protect people. The worst that happens is they stood to and nothing happened. Oh, you lost a night's sleep. But nope, it was Yom Kippur. Everybody's with their families. They didn't want to do anything. And the conception was Hamas would never attack us because we bribed them with fake jobs and fake money. So these guys talked about this intelligence and said, something's about to happen. And they went, well, we'll just wait. We'll talk about it tomorrow morning. And when they woke up in the morning, it happened. So there's a lot of people out there saying this proves the point that Netanyahu's people are shaping these events to this. But I'm going to counter with this. Every Israeli officer I ever met, every Israeli parent I ever met, there's a sacred contract in Israel, whether you like Israel or not. And I'm not a fan of Israel, but there's a sacred contract. The parents send their sons and daughters to the Israeli Defense Force, where they are going to defend Israel. But those lives are sacred, and the Israeli officers have to treat these lives. This is why when there's a training accident in Israel, in America, we have boys and girls dying training all the time. In America goes, well, that's just serving your country. You know, man, bad things happen. In Israel, it's like, what the hell did you do to my kid? I gave you my kid and you killed him in training? How could you do that? How dare you do that? This is why the Israelis are so casualty averse. When they go to war, you know, damn, people die. I've been to the funerals of Israeli soldiers. They are crying like you've never seen. I've been to funerals of Americans who have been killed in combat, and people are stoic. The immediate family might shed some tears. But in Israel, the entire crowd, the soldiers carrying, in America, you're taught stoicism. You know, if you're part of the funeral, so it's stone face, no emotion. Don't give away anything. Boom, boom. You're professional. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your service. Boom, bam, bam. In Israel, wow, they're crying all because it rips their heart out. So anybody who's trying to tell me that the Israeli military would have allowed this to happen, knowing how many casualties there would be, or willingly sacrifice, I say, no, you're wrong. Now, people can disagree and they, Scott, you're speaking emotionally. But in this case, the emotional reality of the bond between the people of Israel and their military, I think supersedes, because if this was a conspiracy and the Israelis ever found out about it, the people who did this would be dead. Netanyahu would be dead. The chief of staff would be dead. They would be banished from Israel. They would be excommunicated. They were not allowed to be Jews because they betrayed everything there is about Israel. So that's why I don't buy into it. But I understand why people believe it is because when you look at the data points, it's like, wow, there is a conspiracy here. It makes sense. Netanyahu wants to stay in power. Demonstrations are threatening to throw him out. Why not create an incident that brings the parties together? The intelligence people are suppressing the data that could have, prevented this. I just go back to the contract between the people of Israel and their military, and I don't believe that that there would be this kind of conspiracy.
Andrei, do you think this will turn into a global conflict and more countries will be involved in this? How? Because Russia wants to have some normal talks and some other countries except United States to represent those sides, right? They want normal peace talks, which I don't think will take place, unfortunately. But do you think there will be like a global conflict from this region, like it will start and spread?
No, not necessarily. Let's not over dramatize it. Certainly when you have Arab world, okay, let's put it this way. If you take Egypt, for example, or any other Arab country which supports Palestine, okay, and Saudi Arabia made a very kind of loud statement today, just basically saying, screw the relations with Israel, we support, Palestinians, and that's it. You have to understand that very many, the Arab street in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, what have you, they are ready to fight for the freedom of Palestinians to the last Palestinian. They do not necessarily want to fight, for that to the last Arab. They have a still very strong trauma from basically losing 2 wars to Israel. So, and it is still there. The only country which really matters in this respect is, of course, Iran. But you have to understand also who Netanyahu is. Scott made a brilliant description. The guy is a psychopath also. He's very paranoid. And Likudniks, Likud party, these are not really normal people. They are fanatics. And so, and their fixed idea is not only about depopulating Gaza, basically, ethnically cleansing it. Or if the the Palestinians disappear tomorrow, they would just applaud it. The same goes, for example, with such soy boys like Mr. Rubio of the, Senator Marco Rubio and things like that. These are the guys who would, pardon my friends, soil their pants near the 30mm automatic gun. So, and what we have here is very simply idea that somehow United States can help Israel to, win over Iran, to get involved United States constantly on the side of Israel. And this is a really serious interplay between the American Jewish and Israeli lobby and Israel itself. Very many American Jews, they are leaning towards Likud's position. And so many of them, from AIPAC is, basically existed not only to support Israel. One of the key points of the existence of the AIPAC today, American Israeli Political Action Committee, is to somehow commit United States to fight Iran. That's what they dream about, because realistically, Israel cannot fight Iran and win. First, there is no space they can, afford to fly. The only thing they can do actually is probably here and there some airstrikes under some ideal conditions. In terms of ground warfare, first, they cannot reach Iran to start with. So what's left? They need to somehow get United States involved. And then, they see what you can get out of this basically hellish situation. This Likud, this is Netanyahu. This was their agenda all along, since who knows when. Remember Netanyahu with the stupid sign with the nuclear bomb, drawn in the General Assembly in the United Nations. This is ridiculous, It's not even funny. It's kindergarten, but that's their idea fixed, so to speak. And of course, Iran and Israel, they do not have lost between them. But we are now looking at a very complex dynamics within the Arab world and Iran, because Sunni and Shiites. And we had this incredible dynamics between Saudi Arabia and Iran when they suddenly come together, they restore their relations, they want to promote cooperation and things like that. This cannot stand in Knesset, or in Israel. This just absolutely cannot stand. So somehow we are looking at this possibility. But even if we consider this theoretical scenario that the United States decides to commit suicide and somehow attack Iran, and even God forbids, to try something on the ground, we're looking in this case on the very serious increase in instability. But we have to also keep in mind, short of the nuclear war, United States doesn't have resources now to do what it could have done, for example, 25 years ago. You see, so this is out of the question that United States wants to go and fight Iran. There will be a lot of chauvinist rhetoric. There is obviously, as I already stated, we are in atrocity porn, and we are into the, those mantras of the U.S. Congress, which is most of it is in the pockets of the AIPAC. So it's. There will be a lot of this, great statements and things like that. But I don't think so anybody wants the real war. Okay, so now we have to also see how there is a lot of Hezbollah, obviously, in Syrian territory, and many people do not understand the status of Russian Khmeimim base and base in Taurus. It's not there to protect Syrians, and Syrians still are free to a larger sense to make and establish their cooperation and run its cooperation between Hezbollah and Iranians. And you have to keep in mind, in Assad administration, even today, there are very many people who have very close ties, military, intelligence, economic, what have you, with Hezbollah and Iran. And there was a great deal of jealousy and professional envy when Russians went into Syria, and suddenly things started to happen in terms of wiping of ISIS and all this thing. It's still there. Russians do kind of cooperate with Hezbollah to a degree, but primarily the condition of Russians and the arrangement between Russia and Israel was, we are there to protect our interests and fight ISIS. And of course, inevitably, there is a kind of crossover, including for the Syrian people, the benefits which obviously Syria, kind of reaped from Russians interfering there. But there was also arrangement with Israel, because Russia told them, you can attack Hezbollah. We're not going to interfere. If you need to attack Hezbollah, it's between you, Hezbollah, and Syria, not between us and you. And that's the very important thing. The same as it is important thing in terms of the deconfliction line between Russians and Americans who are present in Syria, for example. So, and when you begin to look at this and you look on those connections, it becomes it's screwed up completely, okay? And it is I don't even know what kind of analogy to present here, but it is like keeping the balance between 30 or 40 different points of fulcrums of some physical body, and it is difficult. But I don't think that we are looking at possibility of the global war in this case, except one thing. Arabs may, at some point of time, who knows, decide. I don't know. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but do not forget, Israel has a Samson option. If they feel that the existence of the state of Israel is under real threat and it's about to be annihilated or damaged, so they have nuclear weapons, which of course never counted, and they may go and use whatever the nukes they have.
Thank you so much.
To add on that, I did an interesting interview with Mr. Kedmi, an Israeli politician and diplomat. The other day, he's in Israel right now. He has skin in the game. His son and grandsons are fighting. But just what Andre talked about, he said that if Iran gets involved in this conflict, that he said Israel will only be able to fight Iran if the United States joins in. The United States isn't going to join in. Therefore, Israel has no choice but to turn Iran into the Stone Age. He didn't say nuclear weapons, but the implication is that Israel would use nuclear. And I think that's a strategic decision that's made by Israel at this point. I think it's what we call verbal deterrence. It's not going to happen. I'll tell you why it won't happen too. Iran didn't greenlight this attack. There's a lot of people out there saying Iran was this. No, Iran. Look, if Hamas had told Iran about this, everybody would know about it because the intelligence services would have detected it. The reason why this happened is Hamas didn't tell anybody about it. Let's look at the goals and objectives of Hamas. Hamas is seeking the release of 5,000 prisoners from Israeli jail, political prisoners. They're rotting there right now. One of the things that makes Hamas the organization is the loyalty that they have for one another. And so those guys are in prison. Hamas said, we're going to get you out. And you get them out by taking Israelis prisoner. And now you have a prisoner exchange. And you have to take a lot of prisoners, which they did. This entire operation was about humiliating Israel, which they've done, and seizing so many prisoners that they couldn't be ignored by Israel. And ultimately, a prisoner exchange will be at the heart of whatever the settlement is here. The other thing that Hamas is going to seek to do is to become the second Arab entity to have defeated Israel. Andre, Israel's been beaten twice by an Arab entity, Hezbollah. Hezbollah beat them in 2000 and in 2006. So the Hezbollah beat them, and Hezbollah won in 2006, not by destroying the Israeli military, but by surviving. because Israel said, we're going to destroy Hezbollah. Go back and look at the rhetoric. It's eerily reminiscent of the rhetoric that they're using today. We are going to destroy them. Enough is enough. We're done with this. These animals, we're going to go in.
Yeah, it's a typical Middle Eastern exaggeration and hyperbole. But of course, Hezbollah did really well with the unbeatable, the best tanks in the world called Merkavas. It burned 16 of them using Russian Kornet systems at the Litani River battle. And that was it. This is when the Israel wrapped it up. And Hezbollah, my gosh. So, guys,
Well,
I'm
Israel,
sorry.
but Israel
I
wrapped
have
it up.
to,
You got to go.
yeah, I gotta go, guys.
Andrei,
So I'll see you
gotta
later.
go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrei, so
Sure,
much
my
for joining us
pleasure.
today.
Anytime. Scott, I'll send you an email, and so I will find you. Okay, guys.
Thank
have
you.
fun.
Bye.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Andrei. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, okay,
Thanks.
exit full
I will.
screen.
I will remove you. Okay, Scott.
As
one more question. If
Taylor
you have
Swift
time.
says, call me. No, I'll give you time. Yeah.
Okay. Question is about the land. Why that land, besides the historical and spiritual aspect to it? I'm talking from the political standpoint, geopolitical standpoint, military standpoint. Why there? Why they are fighting so much in this particular space? And again, why it matters so much that this land that Palestine had is shrinking every year, right? It's shrinking when you look at the map. Why is that? Why it cannot be just decided once for all? This is it. We are here. You are there. That's it. Why they are doing this? Just common sense. I want to understand this.
Well, firstly, you have to understand the roots of Israel. It comes from a Zionist movement that began in the late 19th century, in the 1800s. And basically, it's a religious movement to get Jews back to the homeland. And why? Why do they want to bring Jews back to the homeland? So that they're ready for the creation of Israel. Israel can't be created till again, I'm not an expert. Anybody in the chat who disagrees with what I'm about to say, please educate me. But my understanding is that Israel can't be created till the Messiah comes. The Messiah comes till you got to build the temple. You got to rebuild the temple. But you can't rebuild the temple and all that unless the Jews are in their homeland, repositioned for victory. And so these very fanatical religious people were hijacked by, again, a lot of Zionists weren't. They were secularists, but they were people looking for political power. They were looking to create something that they could, call their own, build their own thing. It's a human tendency. But Israel, the land of Israel, has always been about the greater Israel, the biblical Israel. That means that they have to take all of Judea, Samaria, and other lands. It was never about the land that was allocated to them in the partition of the British Mandate at the end of the Second World War. The Zionists always wanted more. If there wasn't this religious aspect attached to it, you could have had a situation where Israelis and Arabs lived next together. Again, we go back to what I talked about at the Negev, when these Zionists went out there and took their 11 points, set up the 11 new kibbutzes to establish an Israeli presence. But the Arabs went, okay, there's enough land here. We can do this. We can live next to each other. And had the Israelis accepted a premise that said Jews and Arabs can live together in peace, and it couldn't have even been an Israeli state. The Arabs were like, we don't have to live under a king in Egypt or a king in Jordan. If you guys want to create this wonderful democracy thing here and call it Israel, we'll do that. Sign us up. We're there. But the Israelis instead killed them and kicked them off their land. And Israel's been fighting for a greater Israel ever since. If you take a look at the Arab lands, there's a great map out there. It shows a series of maps. It starts with what you had in 1948, and then through the various negotiations, you see it just whittled down to this. There's just a little bit of green left of the Arab lands. And if the Israelis had their way, all the green would go away. All the green. Look at what the Israeli solution is for Gaza right now. Over 2 million people live there. The Israeli solution is to open up the Rafah crossing and get all the people out to cleanse it. They'll never be allowed back in. And then Israel will take over Gaza and absorb it into their territory. That's the Israeli plan, to depopulate the Arabs. It's not going to work because the world won't allow it, etc. What we need right now is for Zionism to be defeated intellectually and morally. What I mean by that is the world has to wake up and say that any nation that's premised on stealing the land of others can't exist if they continue to say, in order to live, we have to continue to steal. Look, the United States was premised on stealing the land from the Native Americans. Let's be honest about this. We did manifest destiny across the continent, and we killed the native population, drove them into reservations, and stole their land. That's what we did. Now, but today, if we said, well, in order to continue this, we still have to steal land and all that, so I'd say, man, that's not what America's about. We have a difficult history. We got to live with that history. You got to work on. Israel has a difficult history. Zionism is a very difficult thing to buy into if you have any, humanity in you. But it happened. Israel exists. But we have to respect the fact that the land, much of this land out there, belongs to the Arabs. It's their land, and it needs to be returned to them. That's the future. Now, you're not going to get it all back because, there's a lot of time that's passed since 1948 and today, 75 years. So you can't undo this. Sometimes you just got to draw a line and say what happened before this stays, what happened after this is negotiable. But Israel is going to have to learn to negotiate with the Palestinians about a meaningful, viable Palestinian homeland, inclusive of a lot of the territory that Israel stole from the Palestinians, and it needs to be returned. But that's what this land is about. Palestinians aren't going to give up their the notion of a Palestinian homeland. Are they going to fight for every village that was stolen by the Zionists? No. Even the Palestinians I've spoken to are realistic about what they can and cannot expect from a deal. But they will insist that there is a right to return. But the Israelis fear the right of return, because even if they are returned to a state called Israel, that's going to change the demographics of the state. Right now, Israel is a nation of some 12 million people, plus or minus a couple 100,000. Half of them are Jews. The other half are Arabs, Christian Arabs, Muslims, but Arabs. And the last thing Israel wants to do is come into a deal where suddenly more Arabs flood in, millions of them seeking the right to return. And now you've changed the balance of the demographics so that if Israel is indeed a democracy and these people are given citizenship and they vote, the idea of a Jewish homeland is finished, because non-Jews will have a majority and they're going to vote in a different way. Israel is premised on the notion that it is a Jewish homeland, and they tolerate democracy only so far as Jews continue to dictate the political outcomes on a domestic basis. So this is, the land is linked to that. But this is about political power. It's somewhat about religion, but it's, when we bring in the religion, it's just been perverted by everybody. But we'll bring this up. The Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem is the third most sacred site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. Third most sacred. And Israel has been tear gassing worshipers, abusing worshipers, arresting men inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They've been defacing. Imagine if Muslims raided the Sistine Chapel and harassed the Pope while he was giving his sermon. Wouldn't all of Catholic the world be outraged and up in arms? And wouldn't Christianity be saying that's unacceptable? Well, what do you think the Islamic world believes when they see Israelis going in and defiling the third most sacred site in Islam? And in the West, we're just like, what's the big deal? Okay, so they went into a mosque and they did this. Guys, that just shows your ignorance about Islam and about the Al-Aqsa Mosque and about, anything. Because if you don't understand that is it's one of the greatest insults that can be done to a religion, to take the third most sacred site and abuse it this way, deface it this way, defile it this way. There's many Israelis used to say that it's built on the temple. And if we're going to ever resurrect the temple, we're going to have to destroy the mosque. Good luck with that. So, Israel has created a lot of its own problems with the way that it's, the bestial way that they've treated Palestinians and the Muslim faith.
Thank you, Scott. I have time for 2 more questions.
Sure.
Thank you. I don't know if this is true, that there are 78 bomb shelters in Israel, and about 15 are currently being built. So as I understand, there are some places for people to hide and seek that shelter from the side of Israel. I am not saying here that I support terrorists. I'm saying I stand for humanity, and I value and cherish every human being's life, not the evil, not the satanic rituals that are taking place, because that's how I look at it. This is satanic ritual to me. But I want to know how those people in Palestine can protect themselves. They can't.
Well, first of all, you can't protect yourself from physical destruction if you're a Palestinian today. You can't. The bottom line is right now, Israel is committing horrific war crimes. Every bomb that's dropped on Gaza is a war crime. Every pilot that drops a bomb is a war criminal. Every politician that orders the pilot to drop a bomb is a war criminal. The Palestinians defend themselves by standing tall and taking the hit, by showing to the world that they believe in who they are and what they are, and by the sacrifice of their children. It's not a willing sacrifice, it's a sacrifice that's being imposed on them, but by telling the Israelis that we will not back down. I hate to bring in movies because it's Hollywood, and you don't, but there's a movie, Gandhi. Do you remember the movie Gandhi? And there's a really powerful scene. It's taken from fact, but where the Indians, the Hindus, had Gandhi's followers had they were doing nonviolent demonstration, and they basically were blocking. I guess they were blocking access to a building or something, and the British military came in and they ordered the people forward with the sticks, and they were breaking the bones of these people and beating them. And then they dragged the bodies away, and the next group stood up there, and they beat them, and they beat them, and then they broke their bodies, boom, and they beat them until eventually even the British overlords got sick of it and went, we have to stop. This is sick, what's happening here. The Palestinians defend themselves by standing up and letting the Israelis bomb them, by picking up the bodies, burying the bodies, helping to treat the broken bodies, and then standing up again. The Israelis bomb them. And eventually what's going to happen is the world's going to get sick of the destruction. Israel thinks that it's winning right now. It's not. It's losing. Whatever moral authority Israel had by saying we were attacked, and it's like the United States after 9/11. The entire world rallied around us because we had suffered this egregious loss. But then we go off and we invade Iraq illegally and had nothing to do with it, slaughter hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, and we lost our moral authority. We went into Afghanistan and didn't just evict the Taliban, but instituted a repressive occupation that resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Afghans. We lost the moral authority. Israel has lost the moral authority that it had because of the Hamas actions. It's now, Israel is the one where the world is starting to say, you're the evil party, you're the wrong party. It's going to take some time for the world to get sick of it because unfortunately, the world has acquired a great appetite for death and destruction. But the Palestinian people protect themselves by not surrendering. Because once you surrender, it's over. Once you surrender, this is just going to happen again and again and again. They need to stand up and say, we will not bend the knee. We will not yield, even if you kill us. And at some point, the world is going to say, stop the killing. At that point in time, the Palestinians have won politically. And now they begin a process of hopefully creating the change that changes the situation they find themselves in, so that the next generation doesn't have to be bombed by Israel. The next generation can live in peace and have a future based upon employment, based on self-governance, etc. That's the only way the Palestinians can defend themselves. I wish I could say they have bomb shelters to go to. They don't. Israel will always bomb them. What we need to do right now is get the world to say no more to Israel when it comes to bombing Palestinians.
Thank you, Scott. I really don't. I hope that now in the world, when people look at all those wars happening one after another, we come to this final realization that this is about humanity. This is not about what they are doing to us. This is divide and conquer on replay, on and on and on. It's the same script. It's just different zip code. There is a kidnapping going on such a massive scale. Many months ago, I talked to you about this in Ukraine, about the human trafficking in Ukraine, and about the children and about women, and that's those atrocities that are taking place. And I've watched several videos on YouTube where people were sharing, those who have families in Israel or Palestine, but mainly in Israel, they were sharing the phone calls with family members and how family members were sharing with them how many people are missing. And I mean, not dead, they were kidnapped. So here is another question, because yes, we have terrorists who are taking those people. That's one aspect of it, but I think there is another story going on again. We have this enormous opportunity for human trafficking, Scott.
No, there is. I mean, look, it's not just Ukraine. Go to Seattle and talk to Seattle cops about the youngsters who run away from home and are living on the streets, and how they just disappear. And nobody asks for them. They come from broken homes. Nobody follows them. And the numbers that we're talking about are just ridiculous amounts of numbers. And the same thing in Ukraine. These are the disappeared that nobody talks about, nobody asks. And I think what will happen with the Palestinians is the families there genuinely love their children. And a child who goes missing the family will know it. There's some real, we talk about family values. The Palestinians have some genuine family values. So I don't think we're going to have a lost generation of Palestinian children coming out of Gaza because of this conflict. But in Ukraine, you've rightly identified there's even before this war, though, Anya, this, that Ukraine and Eastern Europe, because of the economic difficulties, women were disappearing into the sex trade. American soldiers that served in Kosovo would all go to Hungary, to Budapest. Why? Why Budapest? Because in Budapest, there were the best brothels. The brothels were staffed with these young Ukrainian girls and young Eastern European girls who were brought in or stolen because they'd show up under thinking that they're going to have a job as a maid, but then they